morning, everybody. Again, I'm Michael Belfer. I'm a partner of Anchin, Block and Anchin. I head up the firm's PR, advertising, and new media group here. I think we have the largest panel here, one of the largest panels, so I'm going to have them introduce themselves. I know there's no shortage of words from these four guys as spending last evening with them. So I'm going to do about themselves, and then we'll go into our discussion.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dino. I'm the founder and CEO of Triberr. It's a content marketing platform for content creators.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Ethan Fedita. I work at the Huffington Post. I run our social media and partnerships. So that's everything from the push on all social, relationships with large social platforms, to any sort of exchanges we have with other websites, trading traffic, syndicating content, and everything basically pre-revenue.
Morning, everybody. My name is Brian Nye. I'm a social media analyst at Henry Schein. We're based on Long Island. We're a healthcare company that sells products to dentists, veterinarians, and doctors at office-based practitioners. And we are a part of the Fortune 300. And right now, my role is to just find out the analytics behind the social media of the company and see how engaging posts are within our community and show people sort of best practices globally of engaging with their audience.
Morning, I'm Chad Parizman, Director of Social Audience Development and Social Strategy for Scripps Networks, HGTV, Food Network, Travel Channel, if you're not familiar with the kind of corporate brand, and work with all of our kind of sit in the middle and work with TV, digital, on social strategy, working with our social vendors, social content, things like that.
Okay, so we're going to go through a couple questions, and I think what we'll do is just go right down the line as we continue, and anybody has any questions, raise their hand, or we'll open up for questions. Somebody will keep the time, I guess, over here. So our topic is how to create viral movements within digital media. So the first question is, what types of viral content live on each types of social media platforms?
I'll pass on this one.
That was easy.
Fair enough. I think the easiest way to push a viral campaign is Facebook. Facebook obviously being the largest traffic driver of a social platform. So you saw a lot of sort of lifestyle type content the last probably half year to a year, really starting to take over Facebook, sort of how Facebook decided to play with their newsfeed algorithm and how content was being pushed around. You know, as was mentioned in the last panel, you're seeing less and less pictures of your friends' babies, and you're seeing more and more content that's being, your friend likes this. Did I mess up? Your friend likes something. So it's a lot of lifestyle content. Thanks for having me. I'll see you guys tomorrow.
He'll be here all week. Don't worry.
But I think there's an interesting shift that's happening now. Obviously, with the new announcements on Facebook, we're seeing a lot more news content sort of working on Facebook, which will be interesting to see sort of how that plays out. But I think we've always sort of viewed Twitter as sort of the news destination because of its timeliness compared to Facebook.
Something I want to talk about as far as Facebook is concerned would be just the growth of video and the autoplay on video within my Facebook feed, where I can't scroll maybe 2 or 3 pages down on my news feed anymore without seeing an autoplay video. I know it's something you could disable, but it's sometimes it's interesting, catches your eye, and that's what it's meant to be there for. So I do. We're encouraging our other divisions and departments around the world just to upload videos directly to Facebook and sort of get that extra engagement, that autoplay feature that's not available if you are posting a link to the YouTube channel or to a page within YouTube, and just upload the raw file to Facebook if you're able to, and just see that live engagement and get more organic feed out of your videos that are most engaging these days.
The Facebook's basically all but killed off YouTube content on the platform itself because they now have their own digital or native video player.
It's interesting though, right? So Cooking Channel released a video last week on how to poach eggs, and I think it just kind of hit the way that we've learned, Facebook video, audio doesn't really matter anymore, so you've got to do a lot more text over video and things like that. So it was, in less than a week, it's gotten over 3 million video plays, 3.5 million I think we're up to now, whereas if you see other stuff that's been around, 10,000, couple 100,000. 4 or 5 years ago, if we had gotten 3.5 million video plays on YouTube in like a week, it would have been like huge viral moment. But it's a 30-second video or an 18-second, I forget, and I don't think we have that same celebration around that anymore, because I don't know that we necessarily consider that viral. I think it's we figured out how to make content for the new Facebook algorithm, and we know that right in 6 months from now we're going to have to change that. But I also think it's worth looking at from other platforms, something like Pinterest, right? And this goes back to kind of maybe how we define virality, which is typically it's been huge spike, gets a lot of massive views in the first couple of weeks, and then maybe tails off. On the other end, more like an actual virus, we've got things on Pinterest. Our Halloween content on HGTV, for example, from 3 years ago is our most popular Halloween content because it just continues to live. And so it's virality in a different way, which is it continues to be repinned and people continue to pin it from our site and continues to kind of live on, even though it is older content. It's still kind of just hanging around and it doesn't go away. And I think the interesting thing will be to figure out how do we create, this year's Halloween content, which if you're a Pinterest user, Halloween starts in like June, is when people start planning. But is there a way to, as we continue to create new Halloween content across all our sites, and that's just one example, but how do we get something into the most popular Halloween content that's not 2, 3, 4 years old? So I think, and Tumblr does the same thing. You can look at kind of how things move around. It's I'd say more traditionally like a virus instead of this big peak.
I think that's a really great distinction is that we've seen the same thing on Pinterest where our highest performing traffic stories are all over a year old. They're just a really great piece that someone on Pinterest pinned to the top of their board and it sort of just lives there and lives on and just keeps churning and churning and churning. So you see that sort of, it's interesting and it's sort of tricky to sort of figure out, am I doing something right on Pinterest? Because the first month a piece goes out, nothing really happens with it. But then a year later, you're really seeing that traffic start is sort of taking off and climbing and growing and just continually churns and churns and churns. And then you have something like, Halloween comes around or Labor Day, sort of these holidays that have boards attached to them. And then they all of a sudden just swell up again and the cycle starts over.
I could just say one more thing about getting influencers connected through your channels, and that way when you do post something, they have the potential of making something viral down the line where you may have them post a video, or you may post a video a year ago, a year later they start following you and find that video and they send it out to their followers and it becomes more viral through that time. So sort of make your content evergreen if possible, where it can be reused a year later and it's not outdated, but also just engaging with those influencers that you have within your network and hopefully they'll be in front of the eyes of the right people.
This is very easy to moderate because these guys will just go on. How important is it in attaching a social influencer or a actor or a famous person to a campaign or a viral movement?
That's a great question.
Thank you.
So I have to run a disclaimer first. My platform enables brands to hire influencers. So obviously I'm all in favor. But I think what's interesting is why this came to be. We didn't come up with the idea. Brands came to us, influencers came to us and says, hey, match us up, right? Not too many brands, even large ones, can hire people like Michael Jordan. And there's only one Michael Jordan to go around, right? So now that we have all these, let's call them mid-tier influencers, right? Bloggers, podcasters, YouTubers, people who are spending time and effort to build out an audience, why not monetize that audience in a very mature, traditional way, which is a spokesperson model, right? So it's hugely effective. It's especially when you can actually scale it out and hire 50 or 100 influencers. Each one of them have an audience of their own, and you as a brand can get to tap into all of those audiences often simultaneously. It's hugely powerful and effective.
For the most part, we've all sort of viewed social sort of like the push of our own content. So at HuffPost, we have so many different social accounts. We have very strong accounts, high engagement, large accounts that we've always seen as, oh, hey, we post on this. This is then what happens because we put it out on that account. But that's just a very small piece of what the actual engagement on a piece of content is. Like Brian said, if you're able to find a way to connect with some sort of influencer, be it a person, it's always me. I'm tracking the clock now. If you can find an influencer that either connects with the message of a piece of content, sort of the goal or the directive or the objective of a piece of content, or they just sort of like that sort of type of content. You're able to sort of tap into their follow base, like Dino said. But even more so, I mean, we've all seen sort of we tweet something randomly and someone somewhere with a larger account picks it up, and you sort of see how your tweet gets the most retweets you've ever gotten. It works with content the same way, where if you're able to target individuals either paid or organically, to try to get that sort of engagement, you direct a tweet at somebody because, I don't know, Sarah McLachlan loves helping dogs. So if there's a piece about shelter dogs, tweet it at her. Maybe she retweets it to her audience, and then maybe that sort of picks up the pace in terms of other influencers jumping on board. You see it with Facebook tagging, where you can target either pages or shows, or you can target so many different things. It's sort of just pulling out what makes the most sense for that piece of content and pushing it in that regard.
As far as influencers go, just tying back to an earlier panel where they were talking about the take from a journalist side, and I learned at a conference I was at a few months ago about following journalists and not so much tying down their mentions or their news feed with your pitches and things like that through Twitter, but just sort of having them see it organically and be that much more satisfied that, hey, like I'm making a difference, I'm standing out in their news feed, and once in a while send them something that's not necessarily a pitch or something, just to say, hey, I really enjoyed that last article that you wrote, and sort of make a comment about it or ask them a question regarding that, rather than just constantly pitch at them and try to pitch them your own stories. Sort of try to create that professional relationship like they were talking about earlier, and then in the long run, hopefully it just pays off for you and your brand, and you're not always that person that they're wanting to block on Twitter because you're constantly throwing pitches at them. So I think that's a big influencer in a way. That some of our recent tweets that have gotten the most engagement have been through Fortune and through NASDAQ, just seeing our content and just retweeting it to their audience. That just further, it blows up just our feed of what we normally would see, and it puts us at the top of our rankings from an analytics standpoint. And so I think just finding those influencers and being just that ever-present person that's not just always trying to give and ask for something, but also just trying to just make a difference and have that outlet, that headline that kind of stands out.
So I'll take this more from the celebrity angle, because we've got, by the power of our TV networks, we have access to kind of household names. We've got Property Brothers, whether it's Bobby Flay or Giada on Food Network, Andrew Zimmern over on Travel Channel. I think the answer is that helps when they can get behind something, but that's not the end-all be-all. So just getting, one of them to retweet or, even feature a piece of content. So going back to the poached eggs example, it didn't feature a talent. It was not from a show with talent. What we found, though, is that it still comes back to context. So if we can figure out the right type of content for Facebook's new video platform and figure out a way to include one of our celebrities, the additive nature of that is where I think we're going to start to see some things. And that's where we've seen some successes, whether it's on Pinterest or Food Network is one of the 11 partners on Snapchat's Discover channel. So we're actually premiering Justin Warner, who won Food Network Star 3 years ago now. We're doing a digital series with him. We're actually premiering that on Snapchat. So it's the right kind of content, or what we think is the right kind of content for Snapchat and what that audience wants. But by bringing the face of someone who, is a rising star in the network, those two things combined will actually become more invaluable, because it's one of those, kind of greater than the sum of the parts types of things.
To Chad's point, one of the campaigns we ran for Al May was with Goldie Hawn, her daughter, I forgot her name. They were global spokespersons for Al May, and then we hired like 50 or 60 influencers to write about makeup moments with mom. Right? And one of the assets that they included in their articles and posts and whatnot was a video from with Goldie Hawn in it, and again, I forgot her. Kate Hudson. Thank you. Yeah. I didn't even know what Al May was until we actually.
Yeah, okay.
You got me.
You have an idea what lunch is today? It's going to be everybody's going to be making their own poached eggs. So that's sort of the leeway into it. How do you protect against a movement going in a negative, getting a negative connotation, and how can you turn it around?
I'm skeptical that you can. Most recent example is Starbucks Race Together campaign, which just had a huge blowback from everybody. Another example is NYPD ran a campaign about a year and a half ago. They asked their Twitter followers to take pictures with cops and post them on Twitter. And some of those pictures, it was promised they would go on Facebook. But what followed was like a torrent of images and videos of cops just doing so it was a huge blowback. Both of these corporations have, PR departments, and they've invested huge sums of money into these campaigns. And once it got derailed, they couldn't bring it back on. So I'm actually super curious to find out how these guys think this plays out.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely tough. I think in those sort of examples, when there is sort of like such a large budget thrown behind something, it's hard to sort of just decide to abandon it. It's really hard to stem the tide of something that actually does turn that negative that quickly. And I think you can drown out, for the most part, you can drown out sort of the early sort of parts of something that turns negative. Trolls are everywhere. You can ignore or drown out trolls. You can sort of try to advance or push along or continue to push the original message that you had. But I think there's sort of a breaking point where sort of continually pushing either a piece of content or concept sort of reaches a tipping point where it's no longer sort of viable or savable, at least in my experience.
I think the campaign that comes to my mind most recently was the Ask SeaWorld campaign that they tried to launch in response to the Blackfish movie on Netflix, and that didn't really turn out so well in their favor the way they had hoped it would. And I've seen commercials for it since and things like that. They're showing these trainers that are talking about just how much they love working for SeaWorld and how they're trying to disprove these things that the movie showed. But just something like that. I mean, like Ethan was saying, it's a little bit hard to come back from something like that and just really try to still make something positive come out of that when that was what you're trying for in the first place. From a personal experience from within our company, I feel like a lot of times your real influencers and people that believe in your brand will defend your brand in a good way. I'm not so sure. I mean, how things happen like that from a SeaWorld perspective, but from our own brand, if we leave a negative comment up there and we'll respond to it if we feel a need to or feel like there's something that's relevant to sort of respond or try to fix the issue for the person. But at the same time, our fan base will then come to our defense and say, hey, well, Henry Schein has done such a great thing for us and they're such a great company and give back to people around the world. And sort of come to our defense rather than having to defend ourselves and have it look like, oh, we're just on the defensive all the time. It's really great that when you have that audience that you've built around your brand that comes to your defense for you, and you don't need to remove those negative posts because there's such a great positive outcome for them in the end.
I think it's a very key sort of distinguisher too. There is that, if you do decide to engage on it, it creates a larger story. It creates a much larger event. If you do decide to target someone who's saying something negative and try to solve that, because now you're even a larger target. So at the end of the day, we sort of approach it from it's social media. Sort of the shelf life is so quick that usually it's better just to let it sort of blow over and let sort of the internet handle itself rather than try to engage and target something. There are definitely points when you decide it's worthwhile to go in and jump in and try to disprove whatever was said if it's really damaging. But most of the times it's just, that was a tweet that got a couple retweets or a couple favorites, and no one's going to see it in 5 minutes anyway, so move on.
You kind of have to know your brand and your community, I think, and have a really good, honest conversation with your marketing team or PR team or whoever's kind of coming up with the next, hashtag or next movement that you're trying to create. We saw something similar last year. We had a little bit of a PR crisis around some talent that had given a pilot show. A website had uncovered some things about them. So the initial thing was, of course, it was posted at 5 o'clock on a Thursday. So then the initial response for the PR team is wait until tomorrow morning. We'll regroup. And I said, no, because then the story becomes the lack of response, right? So we have to respond quickly. There was an initial response that night. There was a kind of a final response the next morning. And to your point, that where there was some blowback around, ultimately, we chose to not pursue something with them. But we knew, because we've seen this before, what we had was either occasionals or people not even familiar with our brand coming to our brand pages, either Facebook or Twitter, saying, I haven't watched your network in years, but let me spout off about things. And what we got was most of those Facebook posts got 4 or 5 genuine fans saying, you clearly don't know the brand, you don't watch the network, whatever it happens to be, coming to our defense, and that's the perfect time, that we can step back. But the key is, and the same thing with we had launched a campaign called Love Home for HGTV a couple of years ago. Again, HGTV is a brand that most people like. They don't necessarily have a strong, they invite us into their homes, but there's not really a strong negative campaign around there. And it was wildly successful because, it wasn't necessarily a controversial, right, to your point. We didn't try and discuss race relations in your home or even, GMO planting. We don't, that's not something that we as a brand will tackle. So that opens it up to kind of, hey, show us some great pictures of your house. And people will comply with that because they typically like our brand. So I think just making sure that you have that conversation up front and really be truthful with yourselves and with your PR team and with your marketing team saying, is this an appropriate campaign for us? What if it goes negative, what is our tolerance before we either respond, pull it down, whatever it happens to be.
If I can just add to Chad's point, it's instructive to look at successful viral campaigns. The one that comes to mind is Dove's sketch artist, Women Are Beautiful campaign. This ran about maybe 2 years ago. I'm sure some of you have seen it. It was hugely successful. So if we compare that campaign to something like Race Together, right? Dove produced a piece of content that couldn't be changed the way hashtag Race Together or hashtag MyNYPD can be changed. You can't control what people place around that hashtag. But if somebody shares the video, it doesn't matter what they add, that video is gonna reach, hopefully, the intended target. That's exactly what happened. And it's gonna be spread even more and so on and so forth. So I think it's instructive to compare the two. So maybe a good viral campaign includes a piece of content that can't be so easily changed by the users.
Yeah, you're seeing that right now. HBO just launched for HBO Now this 68 cents, hashtag 68 cents, which is basically 68 cents a day is what it would cost to get HBO Now. It's a product that, right, is aimed squarely at millennials, trying to get them to, instead of pirate Game of Thrones, to actually pay $15 a month. Right, it's free for the first month. But they launched it with a series of videos that I think they're still continuing to release. So I think those two combinations of, we're going to take back to the celebrity. The first one I saw was one of the guys from Girls. So it was him in this very tongue-in-cheek kind of, what else could you do with 68 cents a day, or how minimal that kind of is, with the hashtag plus the video plus the celebrity is where, I think you're going to hit three things that, really work well together.
Any questions? One question. What happened to our...
Interested in...
Hang on, Bella.
Oh.
We're shooting videos, so might as well. We want people to hear you. Go ahead.
All right. So my concern is, when you're talking about media platforms and that kind of thing, how you deal with if your audience is too broad, you're not really connecting with anyone, or, how do you kind of deal with that concern of getting too broad and not having a real connection with your audience?
Great question. How come no one you're chanting, Jerry, Jerry, Jerry? Oh.
Give Dino the last word.
Give Dino the last word. All right.
Or the first word.
So first of all, one of the things that I was hoping we'd touch on is, should going viral even be your goal? And there's some really compelling reasons why that shouldn't be your goal. It's expensive. Traffic is bad. A lot of us don't realize this, but traffic is just traffic. It attracts riffraff. There's often a blowback from the campaign. So virality, in a lot of cases, shouldn't be the goal. So having a very broad audience, what I've done, and what's been really successful, is targeting a single person. Not a single group of people, single avatar, as marketers would say, but a single individual. You reach that guy or that girl, you've done your job. And that's been super effective. So I would say just focus on as narrowly as possible.
Yeah, I think that is a good point. I don't know about focusing on one person, but Definitely the more you target, the more sort of, when you do have some type of content or something that has the potential for virality, whenever you are sort of serving to a huge or a broad audience, you don't really get that engagement. It's sort of like the syndrome where, you have 30 people in a room and no one steps up to ask a question because there's 29 other people there to judge them. But if you have 4 or 5 people, then you get a really great conversation going on. So I think if you're able to find sort of a target audience that's a lot smaller, that people are able to step out of their comfort zone in a sense, that they can share something or they can engage with something without so many people, sort of judging them in a sense. I guess that's what it is. You also get a lot more sort of, there's a much more intimate connection when you have that sort of targeted response, and that's sort of when the wheels start to turn, and then you can sort of slowly get into a more broader audience, and as that develops.
I think one of the ways we've tried to really focus in on not having a broad audience that isn't our customers is by using Facebook's custom audiences and uploading email lists and really targeting those audiences and making sure that they're our customers. Because our most popular Facebook page is a page that has over 40,000 likes or so, but their audiences, if you look at their numbers from the analytics standpoint, are not necessarily our customers, and so that's why each month they also have the least amount of engagement on a ratio of their content to the amount of followers they have. Where you see this really broad audience, you're like, oh great, that's so awesome, you have so many likes. But at the same time, they're not really seeing that ratio of the engagement, the shares, and the comments on their content. Whereas some of our smaller pages that have that right audience and have those right followers on their accounts, they get that great engagement because they took the time and took the money really to invest in reaching to their customers that they know are their direct audience, and those are the people that really want to see their content and not just throwing sort of casting a net out over the entire world.
We have TV networks available in over 90 million homes. We focus on everyone has to eat, most people have somewhere to live, and most people travel places. So, our networks themselves are pretty broad, but, and I think that still works. But again, knowing that, knowing who our brands are and kind of who we speak to typically, you don't necessarily see us doing programming for, certainly not one person, but even, even our niche audiences. So, our upfronts are later today, right? So we're number one in upscale women. That's not necessarily, that's kind of who we want to retain, but that's who's watching our TV programming. And so from an advertiser perspective, from a content creator perspective, that at least is a target to kind of hit. And if, guys can come along too, great. But, we're in the business of big, broad swaths of groups of people, so.
Okay, thank you. These guys are going to be around for a little while to answer questions in back?
Yep.
Or in the green room? Thank you.
Great.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.